Hello, and welcome to another edition of TMS TV. I'm here with Angus McIntyre. So, in your years of driving a bus, do you have a favorite era? Because it sounds as though each time period had different challenges and different rewards. We could probably break it down into the introduction of different types of vehicles for the transit service.
Okay.
So when I started, everything was left over from post-war, post-Second World War, from the 40s, 50s. All the equipment, everything was already 20 years old. And that was a real plus to me, was now I get to operate this stuff that I used to ride on and enjoy and so on. Now I'm doing it. And to the credit of the transit system and the service, some of these vehicles lasted for 34 years, like the Brill trolleys. I ended up driving for 15 years. I thought I'd be happy if I drove them for 5 years, and yet the Brill trolleys were replaced with an interim period of 50 flyer trolleys, and then all replaced by 1984 with a new model of flyer trolley. And so each of those periods of innovation and change in design and so on, when the low floors came along, that was a whole new era, because everything prior to the 1990s had been high floor buses. Now there's a whole new era and everything's become low floor. So um, I look back probably fondly on the earliest days of the Brill trolleys. The city at that time was 80% lit at night by incandescent street lighting, which is a very warm and glare-free light. And there was a lot of neon signs in the city, and particularly downtown. So the city had a different feel. It had a warmer, comfortable feel to it. When the street lighting changed to mercury vapor, it was this harsh blue gray light and a lot of the neon signs disappeared. And very gradually, some of the favorite old buildings, like the Burke's building, was torn down. And so the earliest years, I think, were probably my favorite time, because it was a city uh, that was in a sort of suspended animation. Nothing really much had changed between the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But then all of a sudden, by the late 70s and early 80s, Expo 86 and the Winter Olympics, a lot of things came up that really changed the city. So even though for those 40 years, I enjoyed driving all that time, all the new equipment, I was quite honored sometimes to be able to be the first behind the wheel of some of the new equipment, and was asked to be part of advice and selection and so on. So that was the other side of it. It was a very interesting hands-on kind of career. My father was a business executive for his whole life. I'm sure he wanted me in that direction too, go to university and so on. But I never liked that office type of atmosphere. I always preferred to be more of a hands-on type of thing. And the buses had manual steering when I started, which we were trained how to operate. But down the years, we didn't finally get power steering until the early 1980s, much later than it really should have been, partly because so many women drivers were now driving. The last of the women drivers from the Second World War, Idra McLeod, retired 2 years after the first new generation of Anna Dean, for example, became first of the women drivers of the new generation. So we've had a continuum of women operators all that time. But I did a lot of photography, nighttime photography, and documenting the way the city and the transit system looked at that time. So many of the pictures I have of the Brill trolleys and the fish bowls and the buses and so on, in the background, there's the old city, which is gone. Right?
Mm.
I've got a series of pictures at Metrotown bus loop in 1988, and the whole area around that bus loop at Metrotown, the SkyTrain had just opened. It was 1986, actually. Uh, and it's just open spaces and fields and this the house here and there. And of course, you look at it now, and it's completely built up, and it's a huge, busy SkyTrain stop.
So one thing that's always amazed me about your photographs is that you had so much recovery time to be able to go shoot these. Um, how did you find the run times as the years progressed and the system got increasingly tightened up?
Yeah, I was lucky because the Stanley Park Nanaimo run, the Dunbar, Nanaimo, and Fourth Powell, and so on, generally speaking, in the evening had 15 to 20-minute recovery times at the end of the line, in places where you could go get a snack and so on, Spokane and Kingsway. So, the the running times, most evenings weren't a problem because, um, there wasn't the type of traffic that we had to deal with. And certainly by midnight, when you headed back to the garage, particularly down Granville Street and so on, you were pretty much on your own. Like, even on Granville, the traffic was negligible
Mm.
because the city just sort of rolled up and that was it.
This may be an unfair question, but in your 40 years, do you have any regrets about your choice of career?
Well, not within the career itself. I regret in a way that I didn't sign Burnaby for one sheet and work the Prevost stick shift buses that went up to Simon Fraser. There were only 5 of these buses. They were very rare
Yeah.
Prevost transit buses, and in retrospect, I would like to have done that.
Yeah.
Uh, but as far as, like I mentioned that we lived in Australia for 5 years, and, Melbourne has a huge tram system to this day, and not knowing that we would move back to Canada, that was my desired occupation, would be to be a tram driver in Melbourne. Um, and then we did a holiday to Perth, West Australia, which had trolley buses at that time. And when I saw the trolley buses operating, I thought, I like those more than trams. Like, there was something about them with the 2 poles and the way they worked. So when we moved here, uh, I already knew, because we'd stayed in Vancouver on our way back from Australia in 1963, that they had these real trolleys. So when we moved here, the timing and the location couldn't have been better for what I really wanted to do. I knew some other people. I was 21 when I applied, but they actually, the age they wanted you to be was 22. So when I put in my application, they contacted me. By that time, in those days, everything was by telephone. Um, they contacted me and they said that they'd have to wait till I was 22, which was in the middle of September. And I said, and I knew they were very short of drivers. And so I said, well, I'd still like to come and talk to you anyway. And a friend of mine, had already done the same kind of thing. He was 21 in training, but he turned 22 when he graduated. So I went in for the first interview, and they said, well, considering that you'll turn 22 by the time you finish training, we're going to hire you. But the condition was that if I was starting the following Monday, this was on a Friday, if I started on the following Monday, I would be forced to work out of the Burnaby garage, Kensington. Whereas if I waited another week, I'd work out of Oak Ridge. And because I didn't have a car and commuting would have been a problem, I chose to wait the extra week. And of course, all I wanted to do was drive the trolley. So that's how that all settled in. So those earliest years, to me, even though in some ways they were a little more difficult, those were some of the best years. And as time went on, we go down to Seattle to visit. I traveled to other cities, so on, and these people that were transit fans in other cities would come to visit Vancouver. So there was a lot of interchange of friends and activities and visits for the transit systems in these other cities and coming to Vancouver.